It's not all the time you spend just $300 on a lens and get this much value in return. This is the Laowa 10mm f4, and they're calling it a cookie lens. It's really a pancake lens if you want to classify it, but in fairness, this is small and delightful enough to be compared to a cookie. The filter threads are only 37mm, and alongside other lenses, this 10mm looks like a cap by comparison. Now, size is one thing, but being a proper wide-angle lens for not a lot of money should be a value add I don't really have to explain. It's an APS-C lens, so 15mm full-frame equivalent is certainly wide enough for those special times when you need an ultra-wide. But with the lens being so physically small, you would think that image quality would get sacrificed for its size. And that's when this lens becomes even more impressive. Aside from some vignetting wide open, the optics are holding up surprisingly well for both a lens of this size and a lens of this price. Consider as well, this is a fully manual lens, so no electronic contacts and no in-body profile correction to lend a hand. Yet distortion is extremely well controlled. You can get your lines very nice and straight right out of this 10mm. Though realistically, distortion is not going to be exactly zero. There's still a very little bit of barrel distortion, but it's the very consistent, non-wavy kind which you can fix in a few seconds in post. It does have a tendency to flare and ghost a little when pointed directly into bright light, but for the casual shooting you'll most likely be using this lens for, I would argue that it's not exactly a dislike. You'll also be getting these 10-pointed sun stars with its 5-bladed iris, and speaking of that, this lens does stop down in full one-stop increments. Just thought that was something worth noting. But you can see, despite the lens barrel having so little space to work with, it's got all the markings done properly, including a depth of field scale, which is a nice touch considering this is a lens you might be hip shooting with quite often. One thing I do recommend keeping in mind though is when you operate the focus, your fingers are very close to the tip of an ultra wide angle lens. Again, it's a very short lens, so it's not all that difficult for your finger to creep into the edges of your frame. Also, mounting and unmounting a lens this tiny presents a challenge of its own as well, because there's not much for you to grab onto, and most of it are moving parts. That being said, the lens is built remarkably well. The focus ring is smooth and dampened, the iris ring clicks nicely, and the entire lens barrel is metal. There is nothing you touch when operating this lens that isn't solid metal, from the tip of the focus ring all the way to the lens mount. It certainly surpasses expectations for such an affordable lens, and if that wasn't impressive enough, it also uses a fully internal focus group, so front element does not move as you focus. I've mainly been using this on the Fuji X Pro 3, but it's actually available for quite a lot of mounts. Nikon Z, Canon EF, Sony E mount, or the L mount. You can also get it in a silver option. It's truly a lens you can't really dislike for how well it does everything. From presenting itself to the pictures you get, all for $300. I've literally spent more on a single memory card than what this lens costs. And for that money, you get a properly good wide-angle prime that fits a lot of information within your frame, lets you get really close to your subjects, yet barely adds to the footprint of your camera. It's a cookie that's genuinely delightful, and one you'd certainly not mind just bringing along.